Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Matt and Tim count down the top 20 fastest growing trees.
Konnichiwa, y'all, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Today we're going to be talking about some of the fastest growing Japanese maples. If you like this kind of thing, make sure to like and subscribe to the MrMaple Show on YouTube, as well as give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform. We air these on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube.
And with 1,500 different varieties of Japanese maples, it's really fun for us to be able to create some of these top lists. The fastest growing Japanase maples, some of these will surprise you. These are our experiences with them growing here and with our customers growing them as well. Some of these, we didn't originally think was going to be as fast growing as they are. So some of these are quite shocking. Y'all, we're going to jump into our top 20 fastest growing Japanese maples.
Heavily requested. We talk a lot about dwarf Japanese maples. A lot of folks are looking for faster growing trees. Now, for this list, we did only talk about commonly referred to as Japanese maple trees. So we didn't put truncatums, some of the other species in here that are faster. All these are on palmatum. So we didn't include trident maples even. These are all Acer palmatum grafted too. There may be some different species within there, but they're that closely related.
Y'all, starting in at number 20 is going to be a surprise for many of y'all. This is one that's shocked us how quickly this Japanese maple is growing. We're talking about Acer palmatum La Diabla.
Yeah, this one has been a real charger out the gate. I mean, even the 1 gallons, great size 1 gallons, quick, seems to be very vigorous, very fast growing. I've been really impressed with the colors on it. Like, it's got a lot of color changes. There'll be a lot of different trees people really hadn't heard about much on this podcast as well. But La Diabla, it gets out there. I would say well over a foot of growth a year.
And it's been one that's impressed us in 1 gallons because it really jumps out there and takes off here for us in our greenhouses. And, there's plenty of varieties we have in the greenhouses that you see growing all the time, but these are always the biggest set in the greenhouse. And they're selling. It's not like they're just sitting there. They just jump out quicker than many of the other trees. It's been one that's really impressed me. La Diabla leaves out in the spring as an intense orange red. And so it basically has the name of the devil girl. That's what that translates as.
Thought you were going to go Ricky Bobby and say it was the devil chicken.
Nope.
Shake and bake.
Nope. I would think that'd be like La Diablo Pollo or something.
I think it means the devil chicken, Cal Naughton Jr.
But La Diabla is just such a cool plant and with an intense spring color. Think about the colors you get on something like Winoyama, but turned up a notch. And La Diabla, much faster growing for us than Winoyama.
All right, guys, coming here at number 19, we've got English lace. Now, this is going to be the fastest growing red lace leaf on our list. It's an upright that kind of weeps down eventually. English lace, we were actually some of the original people to get to evaluate this one from Jerry Childs. This is a semi-upright. So we were originally looking at this as being the red form of Seryu. Now, it doesn't quite live up to the red form of Seryu as being that fast. Seryu is a little bit faster. But as far as a red lace leaf, this one takes the cake. There's nothing even close to it.
Now, at an early age, I recommend staking up English lace, pointing it in the right direction upwards, and it will definitely go upwards fairly fast. And then as it ages, it starts arching outward more and then cascading downward. And this creates just this very unique effect that has a really nice arching habit, but it also makes it one of the quickest growing red lace leaves of them all.
Yeah, we had 2 evaluations Jerry Childs sent us back in like 2010-ish, maybe 2011. And there were English lace 1 and 2. And so we kind of helped him make a selection of the very best one. Really fun to get involved with that. Really kind of him to include us in there, partially because we had so many cultivars. He wanted us to evaluate it as to what was out there. Like Tim said, staking it gets a good central leader going. I find this to easily be over a foot of growth a year for an upright, semi-upright red. Love it. In the landscape, I love to stake this one up. Let it get about 8-10 foot in that kind of range and just let it arch out. Gets one of those bigger habits to it. It'll exceed, something like Lionheart there very quickly. Lionheart was one of the champions for a lace leaf that's going to grow quickly but have a semi-arching habit. English lace, more upright and faster.
And it's got some good fall colors too. You can get some really nice red oranges in the fall. I mean, English lace is just an exceptional red lace leaf in the garden, but it gets there quickly, so it makes a specimen fairly fast. Coming at number 18, we've got another tree that makes a nice specimen lace leaf. And this is possibly the quickest growing lace leaf, that has that weeping habit. We're talking about Germain's gyration.
It's the fastest growing lace leaf cascading form of them all. This one gets out there quickly. We often tell people, people will say, I don't have time for this to grow. I want it to look like the Longwood Gardens. I want it to look like the Biltmore Estate. And I want it to be there now. Everybody wants that instant gratification now. Well, Germain's gyration is 10 foot tall by 10 foot wide, typically in 10 years, which is unprecedented for a lace leaf. I mean, it gets out there, it leaps. This is a green lace leaf, golden yellow to orange in the fall. Heat tolerance is off the charts as well. Durability is high, big leaves to it. But what really makes it special is that growth rate. That growth rate is second to none when it comes to speed and time. What we always do on every one of our trees is we give people a time frame. What you find with a lot of cultivars, and Tim and I often try to explain this, are the oldest cultivars are the biggest. And that makes no sense because people are just looking at the bigger specimen. So if we were going to say that, if we were going to say, what's the biggest tree we know of? Well, the Hopewood Estate is the biggest tree I know of that's a red. Hopewood Estate red is the biggest. Yeah, well, it's been there since like 1890. That doesn't mean it's the fastest growing. So given, both were grafted at the same time under the same growing conditions, that's kind of how we're looking at this list. That's what we determine as the fastest.
Yeah, and it's a very quick grower, and it really gets out there. Not only just the height, but also the width. So it really fills out and makes a beautiful specimen, but it does that with a contorting habit, which is unusual for many of these faster growing Japanese maples. Many of them grow in a straight fashion, which give them a lot of size quickly. This one grows very crooked and twisted, and it gives it a very interesting shape. That's where it gets the name Germain's gyration. It's also known under contorta as well. And if you got to think, if this tree had straight branches, how much faster would this be growing? I mean, even faster. And so it's amazing that this tree gets out there so quickly with its unique shape. It makes a great tree to even see out a leaf just because of its unique habit. To me, this is one of my favorite trees on the list, even though it's a lace leaf, and it's coming in here at number 18.
All right, guys, at number 17, we've got our fastest growing Acer japonicum on our list today, and that is Emmett's Pumpkin. Emmett's Pumpkin, I've had it grow 1.5 feet in a year. Gets out there for an Acer japonicum very quickly. Really gets out there. Great orange spring color, orange fall color. But really, if you're looking for an Acer japonicum, most of them don't grow that quickly. Emmett's Pumpkin is by far the fastest one.
Yeah, Emmett's Pumpkin just jets out there. And we got a large one that we have out at Maplewood Gardens. I've seen this tree in so many gardens, and it's always the fastest growing Acer japonicum. I've seen more than a foot of growth per year, and it gets out there. And because it gets out there so quickly and it has those large leaves, it even makes a even bigger presence.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 16, we've got one of our fastest growing Shirosawatums on the list, and that's Acer Shirosawatum Sunny. Now, this is a seedling selected from Jordan, which is already a very fast growing Acer Shirosawatum. Sunny tends to exceed Jordan in its growth rate at well over 1 foot to 1.5 feet of growth a year. This one gets out there quickly, distinctly sets itself apart from Jordan because it is more of an orange in the spring. So early spring, you'll get some really intense, bold oranges on that large leaf. Likely has some palmatum influence, increasing that vigor in it, because this one just takes off.
It really does. I mean, for me, it's just one of those trees that just adds so much yellow out there in the landscape. The orange color in the spring is outstanding, but when you have such a fast-growing yellow Japanese maple, it really adds so much to the garden. And this is a tree that we originally thought was going to be slower growing. I mean, most Shirosawatums are slower growing, and this has proven to us to have over 1 foot of growth per year and competing up there with Emmett's Pumpkin. I mean, it's insane to me how fast growing this is. It's much faster than Jordan. And I never expected that to be the case. Jordan is much faster than Arium. And it's just like we've just keep finding these trees that are more improvements on, Acer Shirosawattum Arium, the golden full moon maple that everybody loves. this is a tree that's vigorous and is going to do well in the landscape and establishes itself very quickly. And it's extremely beautiful.
Yeah, that orange spring color is part of what makes it so special.
Next up, guys, coming in at number 15, we've got Tsukasa Silhouette. This is a selection by Yutaka Tanaka at Tsukasa Maple in Japan. And to me, this is one of the most heat-tolerant trees, but it also gets out there very quickly. Now, when I say it gets out there, unlike Germain's Gyration that puts out a lot of width and cascades, Tsukasa Silhouette is tall and narrow, and it puts all of its energy into being tall and narrow. And I've seen, almost 2 foot of growth sometimes on Tsukasa Silhouette in a year, which is really impressive for an Acer palmatum.
Yeah, tall, skinny, very narrow in its habit. A lot of that growth is focused on upward growth. You want to cut this one when it's young to not have multiple central leaders. So you want to keep one central leader focused on this one. That'll increase the growth rate and how narrow the plant is.
Now, it also is underrated for fall color. I mean, it gives you some bright red fall colors as well. And it's just an easy tree for people to grow. One thing I will note with Tsukasa Silhouette is make sure to give it plenty of sunlight. If you put it in too much shade, Tsukasa Silhouette, it will get a little bit wider. And if you grow it in more sunlight, you're going to keep that more narrow form that Tsukasa Silhouette was selected for.
All right, coming in here at number 14, we actually have another Shirasawadum. This one normally listed as palmatum. So maybe I spoke too soon earlier when I said our highest listed Shirasawadum. This one is a palmatum X Shirasawadum, maybe a Shirasawadum X palmatum, however you want to list it. I know from Cor Van Gelderen that it is a seedling from Palmetifolium. And we have Acer Shirasawadum X Trompenberg, which has that claw-like shape. Very vigorous tree. That's not uncommon for this one to put on well over 1.5 foot of growth a year.
And Trompenberg really gets out there, and it makes a good specimen. It gets a lot of width to it, and it will be almost as wide as it is tall. So it really fills out a space fairly well. The leaf on Trompenberg cups downward, so it gives a unique texture in the garden as well. And the fall colors, you can get some really bold orange reds in the fall on Trompenberg. I mean, it's named after Trompenberg Arboretum, and a lot of people in America are like, that's hard to pronounce. So, I wish it had a name like Dragon Claw. Y'all, Trompenberg is amazing just the way it is. It's an amazing selection. It gets a real nice thick structure to it as well. To me, it's awesome.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 13, we've got Sango Kaku.
Sango Kaku is a coral bark selection that is the fastest growing of all the coral bark selections. It's a palmate selection, so it's got those small leaves, and it grows fairly fast. It gives you some of that bright red winter interest during those winter months, and it's one of the most consistent yellow fall colors in the landscape. We just did a full, tour of Gibbs Gardens, and you should go check out that on our YouTube channel, the MrMaple Show. But it is simply amazing for fall color, and Gibbs Gardens uses Sango Kaku sporadically all across the garden to give that yellow fall color. And this tree gets out there, and it gets out there very quickly, making a very good specimen.
Yeah, it greatly exceeds the growth rate of something like Baton Rouge or even Benikawa, which are nice, upright coral bark specimens. Sango Kaku tends to be more in that 20-foot range, even in 15 years, putting it at over 1 foot of growth a year. Really gets out there nicely. Again, the new growth is the most bright red, so it fills out very nicely. You'll often see Sango Kaku be in some of the larger trees in people's maple collection. Great plant, great winter interest. We're going to list this one zone 6 through 9, so not all the way down to like zone 5 like many of the others. We have listed our coral barks only down to zone 6. Great plant, though. Great for kind of dry areas that does really well. Like it actually handles sandy soil very well, but very durable.
Yeah, it's been one that's been impressive in its heat tolerance. And when you see a Sango Kaku in the fall, it's just electric in that yellow. And then when the leaves drop, it just brings so much life to the garden, that bright coral red bark that Sango Kaku, the coral bark Japanese maple, is known for.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 12, we've got a fan favorite. We've got Acer palmatum Mila. Now, Mila gets out there quick. It doesn't get massive, but it fills out pretty quickly. Typically over 1 foot to 1.5 foot of growth a year. One of our fan favorite trees here. It's a Dick Vandermatt introduction, the late great Dick Vandermatt. Probably my favorite introduction of his. I love the colors. They're so next level. For me, it might not be a tree your first choice, but I think as you get into maples and you get more of a sophisticated palette, it tends to be one. I see collectors, like they get deeper into collecting. They're like, that Mila's, it just keep rising up on their list, And
Mila is one of those plants that just gets out there. I mean, it's probably 2 feet. It can be almost a 2 foot to 3 foot 1 gallon sometimes. and it jumps out there and takes off. Now, when we're talking about trees in 1 gallons, that's a tree that's essentially been established in that pot. Sometimes Japanese maples may take a year or two to get established in the landscape. So many of these trees, you may see a little bit of growth when you first put it out in the garden in the landscape. The next year you'll see a little bit more, and then that third year they really leap, and that's when you really start to see how fast these trees are going to grow. And Mila does that in just an exceptional way. I mean, it really takes off. It doesn't get a whole lot of width to it, but I'm telling you, when it goes upwards, it skyrockets. And it's always been one that's been really impressive for its growth. But the colors on Mila are just outrageous. It's one of our favorite introductions by Dick Vandermatt. And it just gives you just some unusual orange reds that are just metallic and awesome and different from everything else.
Now, another tip as we talk about vigor in these trees is not prune out your central leader. Leave your central leader strong, prune around your central leader, and keep that headed upward. That will increase the vigor on your plants.
Now, Mila goes to some really good orange fall colors as well. And we're here in the fall in Western North Carolina, and we've got a beautiful one at Maplewood Gardens. To me, this again is one of my favorite trees on this list. But, it's not necessarily the fastest on this list. And we're going to go down and get down what's a little bit faster. At number 11, we've got Allen's Gold.
Yeah, this one might surprise people. As it slows down, you get more of the bark, but this one takes off out the gates. It was actually selected for being that crazy, intense golden yellow spring color, but also for its vigor and speed. So it fills out, grows quickly. It fills out a gallon quickly. It fills out a 3 gallon quickly. It fills out a 7 gallon quickly. Grows quickly in the ground, over a foot to a 1.5 foot of growth a year, typically close to that 1.5 foot of growth. This is one that's going to exceed 10 foot in 10 years, even in the ground. I absolutely love its design. You've heard us talk about this one a lot. It is a pine bark. It's the first of its kind to be a spring interest tree, also with pine bark coloration on the bark. So you get that barking up habit that's famous of Nishikigawa and Arakawa. It is slower to get the bark on it than Arakawa and Nishikigawa, and I think part of that may be by its vigor. You kind of have to get a little bit of the older bark going on. But man, this thing gets out there. I mean, even the original, it's closer to 20 foot now, and it hadn't been around that long.
Yeah, that's the thing that's impressed me quite a bit. You get a tree that has spring color that's simply amazing. It's a very healthy tree. It's got so much vigor to it. And then you get the pine bark that adds to that interest. I mean, it's a next level tree when it comes to, the pine barks. It's the next level tree when it comes to the spring interest Japanese maples. And Allen's Gold, I think it was an accident find that it actually has the pine bark. But I'm telling you, there's nothing else quite like it. It's an amazing tree, and it gets out there and makes a specimen in the garden really quickly.
All right, guys, we're getting into our top 10 now of the fastest growing Japanese maples. You guys got a little of the flavor of what we're laying down here. You got a little bit of the idea of what we're looking at. Again, we've excluded things like tridents and truncatums and some of the fastest growing species. We're talking about things grafted onto palmatum here today. Guys, there's some speed demons in this next little bit. They get out there quickly. They'll provide some shade for your other plants. There's some of the bigger trees in the landscape long term, but that's what we're talking about here today. Trees with a lot of vigor to them, the fastest growing Japanese maples. Coming here at number 10, we've got Shinda Shoujo.
Yeah, Shinda Shoujo, the spring color on that is outrageous. The fire engine red color. It does fade to a green, and then in the fall, that fire engine red color returns, and it just lights up the landscape again. And you get the changes of the seasons with Shinda Shoujo. But what this tree really does well is it makes a specimen in the garden really quickly.
Yeah, Shin means improved, and part of the reason it's an improved form of DeSojo, the color is different also. You can compare the two side by side and get different colorations, but it does have an increased vigor to it. So it is a faster growing tree than DeSojo, typically over 1.5 foot of growth a year. Most of the trees we're going to be talking about on this list put on over 1.5 foot of growth at this point. They're fast, they get out there, they make specimen trees faster than the landscape. Shin DeSojo is one of those trees that you can provide shade for your other plants, your smaller growing plants in the landscape with. It can be kept small. I mean, Shin DeSojo is also popular for bonsais, so you can prune some of these back to keep them smaller. But this one naturally, in its natural form, is going to be a nice tree with a nice canopy. I mean, most of the time when you see a mature Shin DeSojo that's like 20 foot, it has a nice round canopy that's, easily 12, 14 foot wide. Makes a nice crown to it, so you get that big round head to it. Great plant.
I think about the big Shin DeSojo that's at Lakewood Gardens in Washington. I know Frank Biles was a big fan of that Shin DeSojo. Everybody would always come ask for him, what is that color with that tree that has such intense color of a Japanese maple? And it was always, his answer was that Shin DeSojo. they'd get confused whenever they saw it in the summer and it was green, and then all of a sudden in the fall just light up again. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about Japanese maples, though, is that change of the seasons. But there's a huge specimen there in Washington that everyone in the community just loves. And that's what Shindasojo does. It just makes a big tree out there in the garden that's going to command attention and draw you in with those changes of the seasons.
Looks great, too, in the summer when you get that kind of pink new growth over top of that mauve green. Very heat tolerant, so you can shade plants out with it. But I think that summer color is even underrated. You kind of get that shrimp pink little highlights going on over top of the green. It really adds to it.
Coming at number 9, we've got the ever popular Bloodgood.
Hey, the rare and elusive Bloodgood. We still sell a lot of Bloodgoods. People ask about this one all the time. The most underappreciated tree of all time, too, probably the number one seller, but probably the most underappreciated. I heard a collector once say, "I wouldn't have a Bloodgood in my garden." It's like, well, do you even collect Japanese maples then? I'm not sure that you do. Bloodgood's a great plant, man. It's a piece of history. Actually, the gentleman's last name that found this tree, and there's a bunch of different forms of Bloodgood out there. I think one time we were talking to a gentleman who had worked really hard on some research, and he thought he had got it down to 18 different strands.
Oh, there's more than that now.
Of Bloodgood that were in the nursery trade that were commonly sold. Now, the problem with Bloodgood is a lot of people sold seedlings from Bloodgood as Bloodgood. We started out at tailgate markets, and we would see this, every week. We'd be at different tailgate markets all over the U.S., mostly in the South, in Atlanta, and Charlotte, and Columbia, and somebody would be there competing, selling trees, and they'd see Bloodgood selling, and they'd go over and get a label and stick it on their tree, and they're straight from seed, so it would say Bloodgood. And it's probably one of my biggest pet peeves. Like you'll see in like the maple groups online, people will say, "What's this tree?" And they'll say, "That's a Bloodgood." And it's like, well, that tree might be 60 years old. Like a lot of those trees are, especially here in the South, hadn't gotten distributed Bloodgood cultivars by that point. I mean, there are a few around, don't be wrong, but most likely chances are it's from seed. So Bloodgood gets a bad name for that. The true form of Bloodgood, great, vigorous plant, upright, gets some yellow bronzing to it, vigorous, gets out there, typically around 20 foot in 15 years.
Yeah, and it has some phenomenal fall colors. I think Bloodgood is often underrated for its fall color because there are so many other strands of Bloodgood out there that might not be as intense and as good as the original Bloodgood.
It gets watered down.
It gets watered down. The cultivar does when people start selling a lot of seedlings, or, everybody's first answer in those maple groups is, "Oh, you've got a Bloodgood." Well, then somebody comes up and's grafting. They, "Oh, what's that?" "Oh, it's a Bloodgood." And then all of a sudden it starts getting grafted wrong.
Everybody wants to have a name on their tree, whether it's a seedling or not. They always want that dog breed. They want the specific one. They want theirs to be a name brand plant. So, but Bloodgood, it's hard for them to accept not Bloodgood.
Yeah, Bloodgood gets out there, then makes a specimen in the garden quickly. And that's one of the reasons it's one of the faster growing red, upright Japanese maples, especially as it gets established. Now, I will tell you that there are, environmental differences. A tree in a zone 5 is going to grow much slower than a tree in a zone, if you go down to a much warmer zone.
Go down there to Nacogdoches where they get 2 months of winter, right? And they're back into spring. It's fall, 2 months of kind of cold, and then back into growing season.
Yeah, and there could be differences, too, for a tree that's growing in full sun versus a tree that's in morning sun, afternoon shade. Obviously, the tree that's in morning sun, afternoon shade is really the most ideal condition for most Japanese maples, and that's going to typically be the fastest growing tree in the garden. So you can always say there are some environmental factors, but when we created and built this list, we're sort of putting all that together. These are the trees that we see all across the board that are the faster growing Japanese maples.
Yeah, we kind of look, since we sell maples all over the U.S., we kind of look at them in all different conditions. I mean, most of these are going to work zones 5 through 9, except for the coral barks. And in normal conditions, these are the winners. These are the speed ones that get out there. Now, Bloodgood, another funny fact about that one is it's probably the most mislabeled name. We joke about Turkey Mama with Tsumukiyama. Man, I get some weird ones for Bloodgood. I get True Blood. I get Good Blood.
Blood
Greats. I've had Good Blood's probably the most common one. You got any of those Good Bloods? People say that a lot, and you're like, I know what you want. Let me. I kind of begrudgingly take you to what you want. If you got any of them True Bloods, I'm like, I think that was a show about vampires. You got the wrong thing, man.
So, guys, coming in the 8th fastest growing Japanese maple on our list, we've got Acer palmatum Hogoku.
Oh, another one that's out there, beautiful, golden, orange in the fall. I mean, you get so much orange on this one in the fall. It's almost unreal, the colors. A green upright with that big Amoenum leaf. A classic from Japan, typically over 1.5 foot of growth a year as it gets established. we found this one to be exceptionally cold tolerant as well. You know, Gustin Coelho did some cold tolerant studies in Norway at his daughter's place, basically testing, and he said some of the amoenums and Shirosodums were some of the highest performers of things on palmatum outside of Pseudosmoldianum and the classics we know that outperform. They were some of the highest achievers in palmatum. Hogyoku actually hit the list here too locally for the Mountain Research Center for cold tolerance when we had our freeze in 07. Osakazuki and Hogyoku were on that list of high achievers for less cold damage.
Yeah, I mean, the Acer amenum styles, the ones with that larger leaf, those are going to be faster growing typically too in, like you're talking about, in those colder regions. They can grow fast in the warmer regions as well, but they're very consistent across the board on how fast they grow. And Hogyoku is a green upright Japanese maple. It's a classic selection. It's an older selection from Japan, and it gives you some really nice, starts out a little bit of yellow and then turns into some really nice oranges in the fall.
Beautiful tree. Guys, we are in the top 7. We're down to the fastest of the fast. These are the fast-growing trees, Japanese maples. I mean, you're going to be shocked this one's as low as 7. We got Emperor 1 on the list. Now, Emperor 1 tends to not be taller than Bloodgood long-term, but it tends to beat Bloodgood to 15 feet, so it has to be on this list. It tends to put on 1.5 feet of growth a year to around 15 feet, then slow down. Long-term, you'll typically see Emperor 1 not get quite as big as Bloodgood. Bloodgood continues to outgrow Emperor 1 long-term, but man, Emperor 1 will beat it to 15 feet every single time in the field.
And I think that's what most people are looking for in their garden is a tree. If they're looking for a larger tree, something to get up in that 15-foot kind of size and really make it a statement in the garden. And Emperor 1 does it quicker than many of the others. The thing that's unique about Emperor 1 is while it is quicker growing than Bloodgood, it leaves out 2 weeks later. So it avoids later threats of frost, but you think that it would lose 2 weeks of growth and to be behind Bloodgood, right. But it just grows quicker.
Supercharges.
Yeah, it's supercharged.
Waits and ready, set, grow. It's just sitting there. It's like Qui-Gon Jinn when he's waiting on Darth Maul. He's just ready. Well, he gets cut down. Maybe that's a bad example. Great plant though, vigorous. It's not only one of the most cold tolerant as Tim's talking about. It's one of the most heat tolerant. When somebody's talking about buying a Bloodgood in Dallas, Texas, we're like, hey, consider an Emperor 1. This is going to exceed it for heat tolerance. It's going to exceed it for cold tolerance. Fast, vigorous, green underside of the leaf. I think that has a little bit to do with its heat tolerance. Shiny, glossy leaf to it.
Holds its color so well, though.
Yeah,
one of
the best shapes too. I mean, it makes your stereotypical quintessential upright red maple. So it makes that shape that everybody wants. It's got a strong central leader, nice crown to it. It looks like what people think they want for an upright red Japanese maple.
So, guys, coming at number 6, we've got one of the best fall color maples of all time. We've got Acer palmatum Osakazuki.
Our highest ever cultivar highlight views. I think it's got over 40,000 views on YouTube, maybe 50. It's getting up there. People love this one. That fall color is to die for, y'all. But don't die over this one. It's amazing. The fall color is insanely red. It is some of the best red fall color. When people say they want a fall color Japanese maple, they send us a picture. They say, I want this. They send us Osakazuki. They say, what is this? I saw it. I was driving through Pennsylvania. It's in my neighbor's yard. What the heck is this? I want it now. And it's normally Osakazuki. It's really unrivaled in how bright red it gets. Now, this is a green throughout the spring and summer, so it's going to look a lot like Hogyoku. The two can be pretty comparable, one going bold orange and one going bright red.
And Hogyoku gets out there quickly, and that's what's so impressive about the selection. In a 1 gallon, it gets out there quickly. In the landscape, it gets out there quickly. And it is that amenum style leaf, that bigger leaf, so it will get out there quicker in those colder zones as well as those higher heat zones. It's an easy tree it's an easy tree for people to grow because it established itself well, and it jumps out there and makes a beautiful specimen in the garden. And to me, it's just amazing all the way around.
Like I mentioned with that Hogyoku, this one is more cold tolerant as well. Love it. Big tree, can provide shade for your smaller plants and its sun tolerance. All around, Osakazuki is an absolute winner.
Now, guys, we're getting into the top 5 Japanese maples.
Let's do some of our honorable mentions.
Let's do an honorable mention here, exactly. And so an honorable mention we've got right now for fastest growing Japanese maples is Acer palmatum Sien Kaku.
Yeah, we didn't put this one on our list because it doesn't get huge long term, but for what a lot of people are looking for, it does. This one's going to be the fastest growing Makawa Etsubusa form. That Makawa family are always popular. I have a Sien Kaku in my mother's garden, as well as a 40-year-old, I'd say 25-year-old Makawa Etsubusa in that garden. The 40-year-old's in the other garden. The 25-year-old Makawa Etsubusa's there. That Sien Kaku is probably 10 years old, And people go, oh my gosh, how old is that Macawa? When they hear the one's 25, they say, how old's that one? I'm like, that's about 8 to 9 years old. That's not nearly as old. So, these things continue to grow, but it gets out there way quicker than Macawa, then tightens back up. So then eventually it looks like an old Macawa.
I know I saw we recently had some people from Holland visiting, and they saw how vigorous some of our Macawa Yatsubusas had grown at the Buchholz farm. And they were asking if it was seeing Kaku, because
it can often look pendulous almost in a 1 and a 3. Because it looks like the branches are growing so quick they kind of droop down. It's a semi-dwarf. I mean, it's typically not going to be over 10 foot in 10 years, but it gets out there very quick for a Macawa Yatsubusa form.
Yeah, so if you're looking for that Macawa Yatsubusa form, it's not necessarily going to be the largest tree on this list, but it's going to get out there and give you what you're looking for with that Macawa Yatsubusa shape, the quickest of any of the Japanese maples.
All right, we'll run through some of these other honorable mentions. Heat-tolerant red, Hefner's red, found by Hefner's nursery here in North Carolina. I often joke that it was found by Hugh Hefner, and I tell people it was found at the Playboy Mansion by Hugh Hefner sometimes. But found by Hefner's nursery here in North Carolina, good friends of ours. They've been growing this tree since the 50s. They had this red out in in a patch of seeds they were growing, and they kept looking at it. This is back even in the 50s, and it just kept being the best red color in the shade until they eventually said, we need to do something with that one. So they got that Hefner's red out, started growing it, grafting it, and that's what became Hefner's red. Noted as one of the most heat tolerant for high heat areas as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing selection that is one of the deepest, darkest colors of any of the red Japanese maples. And it gets out there fairly quickly. It does tend to be a little bit more multi-branched, so it often will develop multiple central leaders. So it gives a different shape than something like an Emperor One or a Bloodgood out there in the garden. But it gets out there quickly and makes a beautiful tree.
Suminagashi pretty fast as well.
Yeah, Suminagashi, a selection from Japan that's a Matsumuri, grows really quickly, gets a nice width to it as well. Oddly enough, it is the parent tree to English Lace, which made it onto our list.
Mm-hmm. Some of that vigor definitely handed down.
That vigor takes off and gets out there, and it has phenomenal fall colors as well.
Sojo Nomura, another honorable mention.
Yeah, the red-faced monkey, I believe.
Right.
It's got that big Aminum style leaf, a little bit larger than something like a Bloodgood or a Emperor One on the leaf itself. And I think part of that gives it a little bit of vigor, and it takes off. I mean, it's got a bigger leaf out there to give food for the rest of the plant. Good fast growing upright.
One more added here. We probably could have just done top 25. Right? These are our 5 honorable mentions. Wu Nishiki. Now, Wu Nishiki gets out there quick, guys. Wu Nishiki, I don't know. I'd like to talk to somebody like Sue Egriff or Peter Podaris or one of those brilliant plant people that we know and talk to them. I often talk to them about the effect of the graft and the effect of the plant on the rootstock and the effect of the rootstock on the graft. Typically, there's a somewhat symbiotic relationship, but I found with Wu Nishiki, those trees, they'll even have roots that just grow into the ground quicker. They'll grow out of the pot, they'll take off. There's something to be said for Wu Nishiki's vigor. It's a green with a unique leaf, but not only is a tree growing 1.5 feet a year, those roots are going to China. They're growing out of the nursery pot. They're going into the soil. We got to cut it out of the ground.
It does. And, I've heard a lot of field growers like Carl Munn tell us, they have roots of steel. They're very difficult to dig up in a balled and burlap type situation where you're growing them out in the landscape. And
something interesting going on there.
It takes off. I mean, those roots just become fuel for that tree just to take off and get out there quickly.
All right, guys, you've made it. We're down to our top 5. We're going to hit the top 5 most vigorous, fastest growing Japanese maples of them all. Get your pens and pencils out. We're going to talk about the real deals right here. These are the giants. These are your trees that are going to exceed all other palmatums in growth rate. Coming in here to number 5, we got the hot tamale.
Yeah, so this is an Acer Olive Rainum X palmatum that was found by Masao Shiano. We were able to put the name on it, Hot Tamale, and with his permission, of course. And it is heat tolerant, it's vigorous, and it gets out there quickly in the garden.
You'll see this one sometimes incorrectly sold by us at one point a long time ago as Nakahara Beni. Turned out to be Nakahara Beni B. There was an A and a B. Yano-san said, though, that is not a real name. I do not want that sold under that name. Make sure to put a real name on it if you ever sell it again. So we listen when Yano speaks. We listen. And so we approved Hot Tamale with him, which he thought was fun. And that's what it's become. This one has a intense pink new growth to it. And in the spring, I mean, it's a beautiful display of bright neon pink. It fades to an olive. So I mean, it's an Acer Olivieranum. You get that olive color going on. You get that kind of interesting, shiny green older growth. Then the new growth still continues to be neon pink. So you get that neon pink over top of it, contrasting it very well. One of our most popular ones of our Heat Seeker series gets out there at over 1.5 foot of growth a year too. So you're going to get 1.5 foot of growth on this thing. It's quite vigorous. Great oranges and reds in the fall, but the size on this thing gets out there nicely.
And that's the thing about Hot Tamale is it gets out there quickly, and it does it in such a unique fashion. It can give you some amazing fall colors. It's unique. I've seen some of my friends in France post fall colors in the shade, which is a little more yellow, but in sunlight, you really bring out the reds in the fall with Hot Tamale. And it is one of those trees that loves the heat. One thing you will note with some of the Acer oliveranum selections is, unlike many of the palmatums, that morning sun, afternoon shade may be the best location for them in most growing zones. Most growing zones for Acer oliveranum may grow faster if you give it a little more sun. Now,
we find that our heat seekers in full sun exceed the original plants they're grafted off of in high heat areas. So I've had people growing Hot Tamale in very hot places down south in South Carolina and Texas. Their trees are bigger than mine. I grafted them off of. So it does get out there a little bit faster in hot zones.
So coming at number 4, we've got Acer palmatum, Benny Hagoromo.
Man, this thing leaps. It is a beast. It's interesting because Hanezu's small and compact and dense and round. Hanezu Hagoromo, kind of the cousin of this one, right? Both sessilifoliums. It's the dwarf yellow, the upright red Benny, meaning red. My goodness, Benny Hagoromo takes off. It's over 1.5 foot of growth a year. I've had 2 feet of growth a year on this one. I bought a 3-gallon from Fred Hooks at one of Ed Shin's get-togethers, probably back in like 2009 or 2010. It's planted in my parents' garden, and that thing's 20 foot.
It takes off, and that's the thing that's impressed me every time you see a Benny Hagoromo in the landscape. If you're giving it some sunlight, that thing just jets out there and makes a big specimen really quickly. Now, Benny Hagoromo doesn't get very wide. It gets some width over time, but it gets some height to it really quickly. And I've seen it grow 2.5 feet of growth in a year, which is just outstanding and makes a specimen unlike anything else.
It's interesting because none of the other sessilifolium style leaf shapes are that vigorous. There's some nice ones that make nice sized trees, but I mean, Benny Hagoromo just leaps. It gets out the gate. It's definitely on that upper spectrum for growth. It's a fast growing tree. You know, it has red angel-like feathers. You'll be familiar with Koshimino and Hagoromo that have the elongated feather-like leaf shape. This one is a red spring interest one. You kind of get that Shinda Sojo effect where you get a red splash in the spring, does go to more of an olive after that within red new growth. So you get a little bit of that effect going on. I mean, maybe it's a hybrid with Shinda Sojo. I don't know. But this thing takes off, man. It gets out the gate and it grows.
Now, coming at number 3, we've got Acer palmatum, Orange Flame. Orange Flame is one of the fastest growing Japanese maples that we have. Again, I mentioned this earlier. We have over 1,500 different varieties of Japanese maples, and Orange Flame is up towards the top of the list. It jets out there like no other. The early spring, you get a little bit of bronze when it first leaves out, but it's going to be a green for most of the year. It gets its name for its orange fall color, and that's just the thing that lights up the landscape. But you know, we don't talk enough about Orange Flame's vigor, and it is one of the fastest growing Japanese maples.
This one was found by Scott Mallory, who's a truck driver, and he saw this in a field as a seedling and just couldn't believe the color. The fall color is insane. Great crown to this tree too. I mean, it makes a nice round shaped canopy to it. In the early spring, you get a little bit of blushing of orange too. It can also be bronze depending on your amount of sunlight. Absolutely a showstopper for the color. Orange Flame, though, gets out there quick, guys. I mean, I've had this grow 2 feet a year, especially in the ground. It establishes a lot of caliper, a lot of girth, and then it really takes off. Like this one's one, you're going to love it for shading out your smaller plants because it's going to get out there and make a nice size specimen. It's also going to provide you with some of the best oranges in the entire maple world. I mean, it rivals any sugar maple I've ever seen for fall color.
And shout out to Scott. He's the one who actually gave us the photos we use on MrMaple.com for the fall color and the specimens. You can actually see these trees. And to me, this is a next level cultivar. It's a newer introduction. I mean, you think about fast growing Japanese maples. If you read some of the books, they always think that all the older selections are the fastest growing.
Because they're the biggest.
Because they're the biggest out in the landscape. But when you compare the growth rates, Orange Flame, it gets out there. And it's one of the fastest growing Japanese maples of all time.
be like, what's the biggest growing tree? Nakakomoto weeping. It's 400 years old. people always do that though. And at the late great Peter Gregory, a great friend of mine, and a lot of people in the academic world for maples, people disagree with me. Even Tony Avent disagrees sometimes about giving a time frame. We'll always say in 10 years it gets this big. Well, it could be a little bit different with herbaceous plants versus woody ornamentals, and it also can be a good bit different with species versus cultivars. So Peter Gregory always approached everything from a species standpoint. He was actually a species guy first, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. But oftentimes when you're approaching it from that standpoint, the largest species you've seen in the wild is how big it gets. So if you've seen an Acer calcaratum, in its natural habitat that was 35 feet, well, this could get 35 feet, but it might not necessarily get that big in cultivation in our lifetime. So what we always try to do for the home gardener is give them a time frame that makes sense. So we'll always say in 10 to 15 years, this is what you should expect, because it's a more reasonable time frame than saying this could get 60 feet. Well, really not in any of our lifetimes.
Over time is what they always say.
Over like, time or at maturity.
How much time?
Right. At maturity is probably the most disingenuous term in the nursery trade.
Garden size.
I used to have people fact check me. We used to be doing a lot of tours around the nursery, and there was a lady one time, and she's walking around with her phone, right? And she's quizzing me on different heights and sizes, and she's like, Osakazuki, well, this one says at maturity on this website, it says around 6 feet. And I'm like, well, lady, I'm 6'2", and here's a 3 gallon right here. It's about 6'7". I guess it already reached maturity because it's in a 3 gallon. It's bigger than me. So what was at maturity? Was it at seeding? It was a disingenuous term used to kind of give you whatever size they wanted. Trees will always continue to grow every single year they leaf out. So every single year when trees leaf out, they're going to continue to grow. Now, there are some differences in that. Like we talked about, Emperor 1 tends to beat Bloodgood 215 feet, but it tends to slow down there. So there are some differences there long term. And so at kind of a mature height, Emperor 1 is typically smaller than Bloodgood. But if you look at 10 years, it's going to beat it to it.
So guys, coming in at number 2, we've got Acer palmatum cereus. And this is the fastest growing lace leaf. It's one of the very few truly upright lace leaf Japanese maples, and it gets out there. And I've seen consistently 2 feet, almost 3 feet of growth in a year out of cereus. Yeah,
it's a tree you can put out and get a specimen quickly. We were at the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, and they were using it as mid-level shade because it could shade out the azalea gardens quickly. They had high pines, and they had the cereus in the middle, kind of providing some middle area shade. I've seen beautiful specimens of this, even here in Western North Carolina, 25-foot trees, 20-foot wide. It gets out there quickly. It puts on growth. Typically, this one's going to be 15 to 20 foot in a 10 to 12-year period. So not even that long. It gets out there. 2 feet of growth a year is not uncommon. Beautiful red fall color. We talk about this too, but we've seen this as a cultivar used in temples in Japan. You rarely see cultivars used in temples, but this one's so majestic and so quick. You'll see it used around temples in Japan for its speed, but also its fall color. So it's going to go from that lush green to a bold, bright red in the fall. It really gets out there, and it provides shade for so many other plants. This is probably the one people know the most that they can use to protect their other plants that need more shade. Your tender white and pink variegated forms. People know cereus, it's going to provide you with a canopy.
And it's heat tolerant. It gets out there. When we go visit gardens, often this is one of the biggest trees in the gardens. And it may not always be the oldest tree out there. And that's simply because it grows faster than everything else. And it does that in a beautiful way with the lace leaf leaves. They give a very soft feel, especially as that wind blows. There's something about a large tree that has that soft-like feel that cereus has. And it's very attractive in the garden.
All right, guys, now number 1. Can you guess it? We're down to the gold standard for growth.
The gold standard.
The gold standard. It is hot blonde. Now, Acer olivieranum hot blonde does beat cereus to 20 feet for us. It is a fast-growing, upright, golden yellow Acer olivieranum that goes bright, fiery pink red in the fall. People are going to say we cheated again. They're going to say your favorite tree is coming in at number 1. Well, it's my countdown, and I can tell you that it is faster. You can actually measure this. If you don't believe me, you can buy a cereus, an orange flame, and a hot blonde. We can package them together here on MrMaple.com, ship them out to you, and you can do a side-by-side comparison. Now, especially in your hotter zones, I have a hot blonde customer in Charleston, and her tree is probably around 10 years old, and dang if it isn't bigger than my one here in Western North Carolina in Zone 6B. So in your hotter zones, it's going to take off even faster. There's some down there In Bishopville, South Carolina, I've had customer testimonies from Dallas, Texas on this. Your hotter zones, this one does grow faster. It might be a little slower, in a zone 6 than it is, say, in a zone 8. At Buckholz Nursery, my goodness, these things get out there.
Yeah, they take off. Make sure to give it some sunlight to increase its vigor. We've noticed here in Western North Carolina, trees grow in the shade are about 3/4 to a little bit less than that even, than the height of the exact same tree, same age, planted in sunlight. And so the oliveranums, the heat seekers, they actually seek out that sunlight and they take off, and they actually grow faster in the sunlight than they do in a more shaded situation. Now, one thing to note about Hot Blonde as well, we mentioned it with Emperor 1, but Hot Blonde leafs out later than even Emperor 1. And so it just gets out there quicker. It has that motor getting a start, and then as soon as it starts, it takes off.
That is rare for the Olivieranum species. Normally, Olivieranum wants to leaf out a little early. It is a neat fact that Hot Blonde is one of the very last trees to leaf out because you miss those late frosts. That actually helps it not get stunted back at all, too. So it might have something to do with its vigor, is that it's not taking any frost for us here because it's later to leaf out. It will leaf out a little bit greener and a little bit pinker. So when it first leaves out, you'll have a little bit more green, especially in shade. As that color kind of matures into spring, as you get into that first and second flush in early spring, that's when this tree really starts to be, get your sunglasses out, neon yellow.
And we think that is likely the case because it's likely a hybrid with Acer Shirasawanum aureum, which also leaves out late in the season and also has that yellow color and a little bit of the red border to it, like you see in Hot Blonde. It's a next level plant. And every nurseryman who comes visits us, if they're in Europe,
right,
if they're from anywhere, if they're from Japan, they see Hot Blonde and they realize how special this tree is. How quickly
it's a nurseryman's dream because of the growth rate, the color, the appeal, the fall color. I had several friends who encouraged me to patent this one, and at the time, I had too many of them to sell. I had over 1,000 of them built up, and I needed to make money, right? So we sold them before we patented them, and we needed the income at the time. We couldn't wait on those to be in 7 gallons before we patented it. That's really the truth. But they would have grown that quickly too by the time the patent went through. These are trees you can take from a liner, put in a 3 gallon and finish in a 3 gallon in the same year. That's how vigorous they are. We probably should have patented. Everybody I've talked to in Europe, the guys from Holland here the other day, they're like, yeah, this was worth a patent. We'll pay royalties for this right now if you'll get it to us. So we thought about it with this one, but never did. But guys, it is becoming so popular. You'll find nurseries all over the U.S. I went 4 hours into Canada last year, and I texted my wife. A lot of people know Hot Blonde. I jokingly named this one after my wife. I always say I got extra credit for naming Hot Blonde after Amy. My beautiful wife jokingly gave it that name for her. And I went 4 hours into Canada, and I said, babe, I found your tree here. So I texted her pictures of Hot Blonde growing in Canada, in British Columbia. She couldn't believe it. She thought it was so cool. And we were even above British Columbia at that point, actually. But yeah, we were pretty far up into Canada, and I turned the corner in these greenhouses, and here's 30, 40 Hot Blondes.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly this tree is getting out there. And I think people realize that it is a tree that makes a specimen in the garden fairly fast, gives you some great yellow color throughout the summer. It's extremely heat tolerant, and it gives you phenomenal fall color as well, avoiding those late frosts. I mean, I think it's got every selling point you want on a Japanese maple, and it's the quickest thing that I've ever seen. It's
going to surprise you. It's definitely, especially in your warmer zones, it's going to beat Seiryu to its growth rate. Pretty comparable here in Zone 6B, but I think even in Zone 8, like at Buckholz Nursery in the ground, my goodness, this thing beats Seiryu to 10 feet every single time.
We all hope you all have enjoyed our fastest growing Japanese maples. This has been our top 20. And guys, we've compared many Japanese maples throughout the years, over 1,500 different varieties that we personally have in our collection at MrMaple. And these are our top 20 fastest growing.
Heavily requested. You guys have been looking for this. We've been talking about dwarfs. We've been talking about a lot of different things on this channel. If you love gardening, if you love horticulture, if you want to learn more about Japanese maples and other similar plants, make sure to subscribe to the MrMaple Show on YouTube. We're putting out 7 days a week content. Make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform too. Give us a 5-star review there. That'll help other people find us. We love and appreciate when you guys share this. There's a great community of people in our live chat. We premiere these videos on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. And that live chat's always fun. There's so many fun people there in that maple community having discussions, talking about the plants they have. I'd encourage you to join that community live. You can put down Yellowstone for one weekend. They're almost over anyway. They're done, right? I'll spoiler alert for you. I'll ruin Yellowstone. I'm kidding. But we actually compete with Yellowstones now on Sunday evenings at 8. So that's happening. But we really appreciate you guys jumping in that live chat. We really appreciate you tuning in today.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.